Hey there, so I've got the Canon T90 here, and I've been reading the manual. I went through the whole thing and watched a few videos. There's almost none out there that I could find that had really anything on the camera much. And just doing some other internet research, that kind of thing. So my goal was to try to learn how to use the metering, multiple metering system, they call it. And it's a little bit complicated for some cameras. Because there's a lot of ways you can approach it, and you can approach it with an automatic aperture or manually setting the aperture. There's a whole bunch of different things that you could do, it seems. But so I'm making this video because I'm also hoping to get feedback, because I don't know that I fully understand all of it. The manual is horrible. So basically, though, my understanding is that we turn the camera on in the back here from L to A. Like this, and you'll see information coming up on the screen here. So it gives you your aperture there, and because I'm in aperture priority AV, I should be able to change the aperture. So I have to have my lens locked to the A here. This can adjust, but if I leave it locked like that, it means that the camera can set the aperture. You can actually uncouple this ring and shoot manually, and what it'll do is it'll suggest a shutter speed for you in shutter priority mode, perhaps in others, but I know at least in shutter priority mode you can shoot, and if it'll give you a light reading that actually it's the other way around. It'll give you, you choose an exposure and it'll give you the optimal aperture for you to manually set, so then you can adjust from there basically. So if I leave it locked in though, I'm on automatic mode here, and there's a little spot meter here. You can see how it's a little dot, and so if I go down to the metering here and I flip the little dial, I'll get that's when there's nothing in it. That means that the whole frame pretty much is being metered. It tapers off a bit at the edges, I think, but it's pretty much the whole thing. This is sort of a larger area in the middle that's being monitored, not as much on the edges. I think it's maybe a little hotter in the center. And then this is like really like spot metering. Like it's, I don't know how many degrees, I don't think it's said in the manual, but it's a pretty tight reading right in the center. And so it's not quite as tight, I don't think, as like my Nikon if I put it on manual focus and spot metering, but it's still fairly, fairly tight. And so basically, when I want to set up a shot, what I have to do is there's little focus points inside, and I'm going to cut away to, hopefully if this works and I can actually do video editing for the first time, I'll cut away to a little clip that shows how you set your focus points, or excuse me, your light meter points, and then how the system averages them out. Alright, and so here we are in the camera. I thought this was really cool that this actually works, and sorry if it bounces around a lot, but it's kind of neat. I just have my cell phone up to it. So you can see, you can focus a little bit, you can see that focusing point I was talking about in the middle there. And so basically if I hold down or half press the shutter or press that button on the back that I was talking about, then you'll be able to see that I can get the preview. And so there's two parts to this. There's the part on the bottom. The left part is the shutter speed, the right part is the aperture, and the little light meter that's moving around is showing both, I think, where I started out the frame originally when I pressed the button, and the difference as I move around. So if I meter something brighter after, it'll go up and down. Basically, what we want to do is line up the subject that we're looking at, and you'll see the little sort of target in the center of the screen. You want to try to, it says in the manual, you want to try to cover whatever that target is with that little central indicator on the screen. So you'll line up your shot, and then what you want to do, this is the button here that I was probably talking about a minute ago that allows you to click and set up your focus points. So if I was to focus in on the clock over here, I would come in, cover the clock with that part in the center, set a focus point with this button here. It's the one that's beside the shutter, this little one. So I'll set my first focus point and click down, and then I'll move, say I want to take the camera next over here. I'll click, take another focus point, and then maybe I want to average it out a little bit with something that's maybe a little bit brighter. So those probably weren't the two best examples because they're a dark and a light subject. But say I was to take this pot here and this pot, but then I wanted to actually brighten up the image a little bit, I could also meter on the edge of the camera here. And what it'll do is the two first points that it puts out, it's basically going to average all of them, but it'll put more weight on the first 2 points. So as it says in the manual, if you had a person's face and you had a dark area over here and a light area over here, you might actually meter twice on the face, and then maybe once in something else in the scene that's similar that you maybe want to brighten up and make sure that it's also going to come out properly exposed. And so the other part is about being able to, once you've set those points, you can actually use these two buttons here to shift up and down. So once you have your 3 focus points all on the side of the meter, these will actually shift them all in tandem up and down, and you can sort of set your dark and light points by doing that. And so that's where the manual, I'm a little unclear. It sort of says you should meter things that are really bright and really dark, and then you can kind of set, you know, things that are closest, you know, the darkest thing in the image or the lightest thing in the image, and average them out. So my sense is that you're supposed to maybe take, like, say the clock and the camera, and then once you have the little array of pins there that are measuring your light, it might have 3 little indicators, then you can move them all up and down to make sure that you're in a good range, because the center part means it's, I guess, neutral gray or something, a concept like that. And so basically you want to make sure that, you know, your highlights aren't blown out, I guess, and the lowest points aren't just completely black. So you'll probably line them all up on there and just be able to do some final adjustments to make sure all the points are, you know, falling within a reasonable range. Hopefully you'll be able to get the idea here. And so basically what we want to do is we're going to actually set our measurement points on the side there, so on the right. So I'm going to go to that button that's close to the shutter, and I'm going to go and I'm going to say, okay, well, I want to measure the clock, so I'm going to put a point there. So that middle point that just came up on the right is the point that I just measured. And then if I go and I add another point on the flower pot, I get a second point. So now I've got 2 points there. See how they're moving, and that now there's a third potential point that's showing me the difference on the right there. And so say I want to do one more, I'll come over, I'll cover the camera and take that. So now I've got my 3 focus points, and say that's what I wanted to take, I can snap the picture. So at the bottom, as you're putting those points, it's going to be giving you your totals for the measurement. So if I go over here, let's try this again. I'm going to check this by pressing the preview button at the back. Okay, so I'm going to take the clock. So it's giving me a shutter speed of 4.5 and an aperture of 2.5. I click on the plant pot. Now it's a shutter speed of 20 because I'm setting my aperture, right? It's on aperture priority. And then say I put something a little darker, one of the cameras. See, it pumped it down to 15 as a result. And so at this point I can change my aperture, and it'll automatically set the shutter speed for me as well. So it's memorizing what all those points are, and it's going to hold them for 30 seconds or until I take the picture. And so basically I can snap the picture there. Now if we were to pretend that plant pot there is a face, sometimes if you have more of a shadow on one side of the face or the other, it was showing in the manual how you could go in and say measure one side of the plant pot, then measure the other side of the plant pot, and sometimes you'll get a slightly different reading as a result of that. This time we didn't, but if it was darker on one side of the face or the other. So they were saying for portraits, or for anything, you can put a higher concentration of metering on one item if that item is supposed to hold more weight, sort of mathematically, in terms of how much you want it to emphasize that light going to, I think the concept is middle gray or something like that, right? How much you want that light to be the average light in the picture. And so I could say, for example, measure twice, once, twice on there, and then say, okay, but I really want this bird here to also be kind of in focus. So I cover that with a meter and I meter that as well. And then I can shoot it. It gives me a total of 20, against that aperture, basically. And so I've checked this on my digital camera to see how close the exposures are and kind of what happens. And they're pretty good. It does give you a pretty accurate exposure based on what I probably would have done myself by averaging out 3 elements in an image. And you can do a whole bunch. You could do plant pot, camera. You see how it's just building them up on the side. Clock, bird. Now, I think it's going to take some time to figure out what the logical order is, but do you remember I showed you those little buttons that are almost like exposure compensation buttons? If I start to press them, I can actually shift all my points up and down. So I assume at this point here I'd be darkening out the image, brightening up the image. But if you were like this and you had all your points way out there, you're going to start to get, I suppose, like clipping, right? It'll blow out. So you can say, okay, no, I want this to average a little bit more like that. That, to me, this is mind-blowing. This is so cool, and I wish I had this on my DSLR. Maybe I do, and I just don't know how to use it, but it is a pretty cool feature. So, so far I've mainly just looked at this in the aperture priority mode. I think you can use it in some of the other modes, but you have to play around with it a little bit to kind of understand how it works. I really just wanted to give a basic overview for now. So it is a little bit complicated. There is also exposure compensation as well that you can play with down here if you want to override. But that's the basic concept anyways. And sorry, I don't really know how to do video editing, so this is going to be fragmented because I'm going to go back now and film the part through the viewfinder with my cell phone. But basically, as I say, I'm really hoping that somebody can give me some information and feedback. So one of the things that it doesn't say in the manual and is really confusing is I don't know whether when you change your metering mode here, whether you can still average and spot meter in these other, like there'd be no point in doing it probably if it's doing the whole screen, but can you do something that's a little more averaged like this, where you're taking 3 points and it's sort of estimating, sort of that hot spot in the middle to a degree, and kind of averaging them out. Because what I was finding is I was in the forest and I'd point it at a tree to meter, and it would be like putting my Nikon DSLR on autofocus mode with the finest light, point spot meter with the latest tightest spot meter. And so if I measured even just a fraction of an inch on a tree or something, the complete light of the image would change. And so that would be an issue with a camera like this because I can't actually check the results. So I'm wondering if I could average it out a little bit more, whether I might be able to make more subtle adjustments in the photos, potentially by using this type of like more general metering, central metering. Okay, well anyways, hopefully this is of use to somebody. I know it's a rambling, confusing video, but like I said, I found like nothing on this camera video-wise for walkthroughs online, and I did find a little bit of technical information, but it was just so hard to follow without visuals. So hopefully this will be of some use to somebody. Thanks very much.